I'm going to talk to you today about how I try to conquer one of my worst habits, which is overworking a painting, which is a common problem for so many watercolorists. Working in oil and acrylic, it's a whole different thing. You can scrape it, you can wipe it, you can paint over. With watercolor, it's a lot harder. And I find when I work in watercolor, I tend to overwork and overdo the details. My reference for this painting behind me was a photograph of a structure, a building, where there was a lot of brickwork on the tunneled area and a lot of stonework on the path. And my goal was to not do all that brickwork and stonework and just rely on the colors and values. What I wanted my focal point to be are the shadows that you see over here in the painting of the light and the dappled shadow from the trees outside of the building itself. But the main purpose, the main goal, was for me not to overwork and put every single detail in there. So let's see how this progressed. I've had a picture of this charming little scene that I took at a town in Arizona, Sedona to be specific, and it was at a little community. I should call it not a community, but a group of art galleries and artisan shops in Sedona itself. And I really liked the way the light hit the entrance of this little community and these shadows and the gold on the walls. So I was going to give it a shot and see if I could paint this. Now, how would I go about doing this? Well, my instincts are telling me do a value study first. So I did take pencil and paper and did a rough value study showing the lights, the mediums, and the darks, the shadows. I also don't do this often, but I did a black and white photograph of it as a reference. Now, whether I look at these references when I paint sometimes is debatable because I tend to want to focus back on my original photograph, which is on my iPad. And I have my iPad attached to my drawing board with blue painter's tape on the back, about 15 pieces so it doesn't fall off, but it seems to hold pretty good. So what I did then is I did the sketch itself on watercolor paper. This is a 140-pound watercolor paper, cold press. Any brand will do, but I would say try to go for Arches or some of the better brands like Fabriano. And I sketched it out. Now, what we're looking at here are the first washes. And before I describe what these washes are, I'm going to show you my messy color palette and what I mixed. I have a bunch of burnt sienna just sitting there. Then I did a mixture of Opera, which is a very hot pink by Holbein, which is not a sponsor. And I put in some burnt sienna and also some yellow ochre to take down, or ochre, it's not ochre, it's yellow ochre, right? It's Opera, yellow ochre, and burnt sienna, because I wanted to add some pink into those walls. Then I did a purple mixture of alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue, and then I did some darks with burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And what you see here, yep, you're looking at a little bit of green, because there is a little bit of green in that photograph, and that's just sap green mixed in with the ultramarine blue that was used to create the darks and grays. So that is the basic palette, and here are the brushes I'm using. I'm sorry about the focus on this. It's a 1/2 inch by Princeton, not a sponsor. And then what do we have here? This is a larger 1 inch. I laid these washes in with these brushes. And then for final little detail, because I don't want to get too tight with this, I have a number 8 round. So there's the color mixing that I had done. And going back here, I started laying in burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and some of that purple mixture on the side. And these are just initial washes. I'm going to build on these. And that's on the side of the building as you're looking into it. And you're probably saying to yourself, my God, that's really dark. And her painting isn't. Well, she's going to go ahead and darken that later. And I'll show you what that looks like when I start getting into the steps. I love these shadows in the photograph. I was really intrigued with those. So I started doing the shadows with a mixture of ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and I dropped in some burnt sienna for the light of the tiles. I brought those shadows over here into the foreground and also shadowed a little bit of the wall here and there. And for the wall itself, I did a mixture of the opera, yellow ochre, and burnt sienna. While the paper is wet, I just drop the pigment in. It's a very, very basic start to this. And I do have my handy little swatch of old watercolor paper that I can test the colors on before I put them on there. So that is how I start a painting like this. I'm going slow with this because I don't want to overwork it. My tendency is to get too detailed, work too fast, and not slow down. So what I'm hoping for is that I will go slowly and keep those glowing washes with watercolor that I love so much. All right, I'm starting to add some dark values on the side of this entranceway that I'm painting. I had the same burnt sienna with a little bit of dark value thrown into the side here. Let me pull out a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. And I decided it needed to have some more darks. Take a look at the source photo. It has a whole dark area there and the light area where the sun is hitting on the left. So what I did is I did a mixture of ultramarine blue and some alizarin crimson, and I dropped it in on semi-moist paper. I kept it kind of dry, and then I pulled it with my brush because I wanted to get the impression of that brickwork. I'm not going to put in every single brick. That's just not what I do. And I kept the brushwork going in a certain direction to mimic the brickwork on the very light side. And if you look at, and I'll move over here, there's a ton of brickwork on this little passageway, this walk tunnel, so to speak. I don't want to do that. I just want to capture the impression of that brickwork. So I started putting those darks in. I know those are probably going to be my darkest values. On this side, on the burnt sienna that I had, I did a mixture of burnt sienna and yellow ochre. And it's really light. I'm going to need to knock that back somewhat with the mixture of ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson and some burnt sienna. Let me get over to my palette. This is what I'm doing for my darkest dark, which is ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Then I have more of a high key purple of ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, some burnt sienna and yellow ochre, and just burnt sienna sitting by itself. And something I do when I do have an issue is I use this thing called the Incredible Nib. And it's just a really hard piece of, I want to say, some sort of a plastic. Almost feels like a real hard chamois. And you can get it pretty much, pardon my Band-Aid, you can get it pretty much at any art supply store. And it really helps, once the paint is dry, to lift some of those oopsie marks that you get on the side. I'm going to fix that and make that a more definite line as we go along. I also ended up with some blossoms, which a lot of artists don't like. I left it alone, kind of lifted a little bit, but I'm going to be able to cover that up with some of the shadowing that I do to knock down some of that high key value on the side there. So what is the next step? I think we're going to knock down some of those bright yellow ochre and burnt sienna with a little bit of the same mixture that I used on the other side of the tunnel. I started building on the shadow that you see over here, and this shadow in the photograph has blues and purples and grays in it and some red. So I love to play with those colors when I do shadows. Shadows can be just gray. I don't think they should be. I think they should be all the colors that are being picked up from the atmosphere that is throwing the shadow, which is, in this case, this side of the building, which is a warm burnt sienna, and it kind of reflects in that. I might do a little bit of dry brushing. What I also did was I knocked back some of this bright color on the side of the wall that the sun is hitting with just a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue and a little bit of alizarin crimson. And I'm still not pleased with how it looks. I think it needs to come back a bit more, not as bright, but I thought, and I'm going to save this for the very end, I thought about doing some dry brushing to indicate the brickwork, not to do the brickwork, just to indicate the brickwork. And then I started working more on these shadows that are being thrown from the entrance of this building to the outside. You have them over there. And again, playing with the same colors. The purple mixture of ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson and some burnt sienna thrown in for light, a little bit darker at the base of the wall where there's more shadow, picking up on the same color palette as the side of the wall over here. Next thing, I don't know. It's still bothering me. I think this is a little bit too intense here. Sorry about the camera work. On this side, I think I need to get a little bit more detail with some of that purple mixture. And I may do it as a dry brush instead of doing a lot of moist on moist. And I think I hid those blossoms pretty well with some glazes that I threw over there. This area here where the shadows are, I think this needs to be built on with a little bit more pink and some more with a burnt sienna and a little bit in the green there. My goal on this, and I have to keep telling myself, what are my goals? And my goal is not to overwork it, to keep it very loose and quick and expressionistic and expressive rather than just working on it over and over and over again, which is that overworked look that always gets me in trouble. Take a look at my original source material. You'll see on the right-hand side of that entrance or that tunnel, it's very dark, kind of lightens up in the middle. And then on the left-hand side, there's a little bit of darkness, and it's light because the light is hitting that entrance or that tunnel from right to left, not hitting on this side. What I see that I need to do is darken some more here on the right-hand side and keep this side relatively light, except I think I'm a little too light on the corner and the extreme left of that tunnel entrance. Take a look at it again. So I still need to work on these values. Values are one of the hardest things for me and a lot of artists, whether they're watercolorists or they are oil painters or acrylic painters, is working on the values. So that's what I need to work on next. But before I do that, I realize that really my focal point is this bright area right here where the sun is hitting the entrance into the building, and there's some greenery back there. So I'm going to have to work on building that a little bit more and then see how that plays against this. But as far as my source material, I'm seeing that I really need to work on those values and shadows on the left and the right. I wanted to show you an alternate palette that I use, and these are cheap little palettes I got at the local craft store. I think they ran me $2. And I use this sometimes to do alternate mixes. Now my main palette is this palette over here, and I use that quite often, but sometimes I don't want to, mix too many things in here. I have a limited space, but I'm comfortable with it. But I might want to do an extra color here and there. And this little thing has, pardon the shadows, has a couple of, looks like 4 wells for mixing colors on the palette. And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different wells to hold your color. So that's an alternate palette that I use sometimes, and I did it for this particular painting also. You're going to notice a lot more pink and purple on that entrance into this. I guess it's an entrance into a courtyard. I did build on these colors by adding in some more of that hot pink called Opera, alizarin crimson, also some burnt sienna to create this brown that's on the bottom of it. And then I did a mixture of ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson for some purples. I need to be aware that I have to put some more shadows into the entranceway. And I did also add some pink on that white wall because those colors, those pink colors, are underneath and reflecting off of everything. Keeping that in mind, I had to add some more pink. I'll call it pink, alizarin crimson, to the shadows here because all the colors that are in this wall, the sun is hitting it and they're going to reflect down here also. So we're still looking at this situation where I need to add some more dark values on either side of these bricks or this brick pathway. I'll refer back to here so you know what I'm talking about. But I also would like to pull in a little bit of this alizarin crimson pink mixture into the wall before I start proceeding on the darks. Values are so important. They say color is great, but value makes the painting. And you're probably wondering what this little teeny sketch in here is. This is based on what buildings look like in Italy, and there's usually some shrines to saints. And I'm not going to attempt to recreate all that detail, but I'm keeping this very loose and not covering it with a lot of paint so I can go in and just put some loose detail in, and also keeping the light there very clear because it is a glass light. So the next step will be to pull in some pink into the tops of the brick wall and then tackle those values. I'm finding myself doing a lot of, I guess semi-wet on dry, or actually dry brushing the paint onto the paper and then using a moist brush to move it around and extend it. You're going to see this and go, why is she painting upside down? Well, some people would say I see things differently, which I do. The reason I paint upside down sometimes is it gives me more control. For instance, I can take the brush and work the paint in the direction I want to work it. I have easier access to the areas rather than reaching all the way up here and doing it that way. I just feel I have more control over it if I paint upside down. And also, conversely, or reversely, let me see if I could do this for you without losing focus. Hey, that worked. I could also put it on the side and paint that way. So there's a little tip. Also, when you paint upside down, let's see if we can get this back up here without losing it. When you paint upside down, sometimes you'll see things that you didn't notice before when it's right side up, because your eye and your brain will play tricks on you. So just keep that in mind. This is why I always encourage people, don't tape your paper to your drafting board, to your easel, to your table. Tape it on a piece of foam core, a piece of masonite. Some people tape it on glass, and that way you can move your painting around. And also in watercolor, you can move it around and cause drips and have the paint, again, there's that Band-Aid, sorry, have the paint mingle on the paper by just moving it around. So upside down sometimes is a really good thing. You won't see me necessarily paint on camera, because it's really hard for me to hold an iPhone on a selfie stick and paint. So every once in a while I'll pop something in like this. This is a wad of tissues. They are clean tissues, and what I use them for is I will take my tissues and sometimes dab to get texture on my paintings. I don't have anything I'm dabbing right now, but just to give you an idea of what I do. Also, I am constantly cleaning my brushes off onto the tissues or lifting the water, excess water onto the tissue. I change them out a lot. I spend a fortune on tissues. I don't get the really cheap ones because I find if you put them in water, they will disintegrate for you. They're also good for lifting color. Let's see. I also can take them and I can dab them into my paint here, and there's a little dab. I'm not going to put anything on the canvas, but you could apply that on canvas for texture and then manipulate it with a brush. So there's a little tip for you when you're working on texture, perhaps on buildings. What you're looking at is a dirty mat. Now, I'm not finished with this painting by any means, but long ago I learned if you keep a bunch of mats, pre-cut mats, old mats that you don't use, dirty mats, you can see they've got, oh, this has got like dirt and pieces of paint and stuff like that. Why is it so dirty? Because I use it as a studio mat. And as I'm working on something, usually about halfway through, I take a look at it with the mat and see if I really like the way it's coming out. I don't have too many negatives on this. I still worry about the shadows on this side, and I'm starting to have a little bit of an issue with overworking. Sometimes paper gets old. I've noticed certain brands, and it gets a little funky. I'm getting some issues there, but when I frame it, I'll probably make a mat that covers some of that. But what I did with this, and let me see if I can move this for you. It's just an old mat. That's all. And I don't have it matted. I don't have it attached. I just kind of let it sit there so I have an idea of what it looks like. And that's why I always suggest you keep a bunch of old mats that you don't like, you don't use, size to a lot of the paper that you use, so you can see halfway through how your painting looks. Also, this gives me an idea sometimes on paintings where I should probably crop my painting more when I do my actual matting. I do my own matting. I have a very inexpensive mat cutter, a Logan mat cutter. You can get them relatively cheaply. Let's say it's a lot cheaper than going to a frame shop. So if you do a lot of watercolor and you like to frame it and exhibit it, get a mat cutter that works on your own, and also have some old mats in your studio that you can use to see how your painting is progressing. We're getting down to where I start looking at details in the painting. First of all, I wanted to add some greenery in through here. I thought I'd use my brush to point instead of my band-aided fingers. Let's see. I used a mixture of lemon yellow and some sap green, and then some sap green and ultramarine here and there. I wanted you to feel like you wanted to go out there, excuse me about the focus, go out and see what's past these walls, or to feel like you just came in from outside into this shaded, cool courtyard. And it kind of mimics this over here, the greenery, but I didn't want to do too much detail. I find I get myself caught up in the details. Now, I've heard the saying two different ways. God is in the details and the devil is in the details. So I like to take the middle of the road and say, don't use too many details because it can be good or bad. Another another thing that I added some shadows in through here and here, which you will find are also in the original. Now, where are those shadows coming from? I think these shadows are coming from outside, from trees that are surrounding the building. Sometimes you have to make up little scenarios and stories when you paint. The shadows themselves are just a mixture of ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and just some burnt sienna thrown in. These were done on semi-moist paper, and I kind of manipulated them with the brush. I also added some dark in through here into this mysterious doorway. What's over there? And I try not to keep it too dark because I don't want my eye to be distracted, but I have a feeling it will be. It's going to lead into that. But I wanted to keep this loose and unfussy. So I think I'm going to stop with these values on either side of the vaulted bricked entryway here. And I'm going to start concentrating on detail. I'm going to add a little bit of dry brush on the edges of this entryway. I'm going to do something really light and loose for this little figure over here. Try to bring out this light. This, it's I think like a gas light. Or you could put a candle in there. I'm going to try and work on that a little bit. Add some detail. This is a little gate, pardon the camera work, that I think they close off at night when the complex is closed. I'm going to work on that. So we're down to the final third of adding details and really analyzing what needs to be done to finish this painting off. I believe this is finished, and I'm going to give you a very quick rundown of what I did with this, what I adjusted at the end. This is the step, I call it step 3, the final details. And this is where I added that little statue in there. I overworked it at first, and then I lifted it, and then worked a little bit on that light. I added the gate that they end up using to close off this area in the evening. A few more shadows in through here. I tried to throw some shadows off of that light there, but it didn't quite turn out the way I wanted to. Added some lines with pencil to define some of this brickwork and entryway into this tunnel-like structure. Added some lines with pencil over here on this little doorway off to the side, and even over there. But for the most part, I've left this alone, and I didn't want to overwork it. I added more shadow to the right upper part, the left upper part, and the sides. So I believe that is the completed painting. Did I enjoy doing this? Yeah, I kind of like doing it. Am I happy with it? Some things I'm happy with, some things I could have done better. I could have worked a little bit less on these side bricks, the bricks in the tunnel. I feel I overworked that and kind of lost the dark values that I wanted to. By overworking it, I should have planned that out a little bit better. I think I may have overworked this area here with the little statue in that shrine. I don't know what else to call it. But I am pleased with the shadows that are happening here. And you can see I did sign it in my typical fashion with my last name. I am pleased with the shadows and the luminosity of the shadows. I am pleased with the wall in here. And what would my focal point be? Well, something I like to think about ahead of time, but it doesn't always work. I think my focal point goes right smack dab in the middle of that arch into this pink area and then back out the gate. So that's the end of the painting. I hope you were able to learn a little bit on how to use shadows and values and some of the problems that I've run into using the shadows and values in overworking. Hope this has been a help to you. I thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in learning more about my teaching techniques, take a look at my Patreon channel in the description. Have a great creative week, and above all, remember to keep practicing.